And then we just...
Democrats, thank you for coming and welcome. Hopefully people can find a place to sit. We do have extra chairs here and there. So I'd like to start the meeting with an acknowledgement. We, the Fidalgo Democrats, acknowledge that we gather on indigenous land, the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Samish and Swinomish people, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. If you're not on our mailing list, we have some paper in the back. Please put in your email and phone number if you would like to be on the Fidalgo Democrats mailing list. We do not send out a lot of emails. We are pretty specific in what we do send out. And we let you know notified about upcoming meetings and a couple of important events. Please write so we can read it. That would be helpful. Says the person with the worst handwriting ever. Anyway, before we go any further, please, I'm going to remind everybody to please turn off their phones. So look at your cell phone and make sure that it's on silent or off. Okay, the front door of the library is locked, so you have to use these side doors. There's the bathroom out around the back. If you need to go, please feel free. There are lovely cookies in the bag. Thank you, Rita. And Sarah also made some tea, and there's coffee back there as well. So please feel free to do that. The Fidalgo Democrats are an independent democratic association with a focus on education. I want to remind everyone that we are not a PAC. We cannot endorse candidates or contribute to their campaigns. We do invite Democratic candidates to talk about issues and legislation. If you want to contribute to candidates, we encourage you to go to their websites. There are a few that are still in flux, let's put it that way. We don't charge dues, but we will pass the hat at some point. We do donate to different organizations. We've given money to the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Rural Central Kitchen, and we also volunteer at the Brick Dinner at the Presbyterian Church every several months. The meeting is being recorded by Colton. It is in the back there, and it is available now, from what I understand, on Facebook, and it will be available in a few days on our YouTube channel. So that's pretty exciting. My suggestion is probably not to walk in front of the camera if you can avoid that. And that would be, Colton is a high school student, so he is, we're quite pleased that he's willing to come and help us out. So thank you. We are not going to meet in December, but we will have a meeting in January 14th. And we'll send out the details in the next little while. And before I introduce the speaker, I'd like to see, are there any Democratic Party officials, including PCOs, that would like to raise their hand? Hi, Sarah. I also want to thank Don Ambrose, who edits the Skagit Democrats newsletter. It's really terrific. And also Carol and Rich Tamler, who edit the Whidbey Island newsletter. And Doreen Sadler is our Facebook person, and she keeps that up to date. So that is kind of some of the things that we do. We have Professor Kurt Dunbar here, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and talk about his what he does for a living and a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. When we come to the question and answer period, we're going to have him repeat the question for you. One thing we're going to ask people is not to turn this into grandstanding and going on, because we have a lot of people here and people may have a lot of questions. Well, the way we do it is each person gets one question, and then if we have time, you can get another question. But that's kind of how we're doing it tonight. Please I'm going to remind you to state your name before, and let's see what else. We're not going to walk around with a microphone tonight. And so I think that's all I have to say. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kurt, who's in the back here, and we'll turn off the lights so we can see his slideshow.
Great, that's Kurt. Okay, thank you, Barbara. How's that? We got the mic close enough? You said you'd spank me if I didn't. Okay, get that energy out there. I'm Kurt Dunbar, and I teach history and political science at Skagit Valley College, where I've been an instructor there now for 30 years, 28. I'm getting ahead of myself. 28 years, and I did this talk about 5 or 6 years ago, which I thought was prescient and necessary, and I changed the title. This used to be titled Fascism 101, Learning About Dangerous Ideology. I changed the title, as you can see. Yeah. And I've amended this talk quite a bit too, so that I've got a lot of new material and a different slant looking at it, and I'll explain that as I go along. Let's plow into it. I guess here we are again, in more ways than one. And words are important. Fascism itself comes with a lot of emotional weight, a lot of historical weight, and it's not something to be thrown about lightly, really. It used to be sort of an insult that you threw out, and usually the person that used it didn't know what it meant, the person who was being insulted didn't know what it meant. But words have meaning, and they describe certain things, and with fascism it describes an ideology, a set of ideas. And I like to use this example is, if it walks like a duck, if it swims like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So we're going to look at these characteristics and just see how they fit, how the boxes are checked into what would comprise the ideology of fascism. And I'll let you decide. But you kind of need to know there's some basic tenets, some basic, almost universal characteristics of fascism, and these are the easy ones. Der leader who, in this case, is talking about one people, one empire, or one country, one nation, and one leader. And we know who that leader was. Clearly, with most fascist states, there is a central figure, usually very charismatic, who usually has almost absolute control, either personally or through a party apparatus. So leaders are important. And sometimes they are recognizable as the leader of that party. There is also the people. One thing that fascists have in common is a rallying point around the people, in German Volk, but it's strength through blood. They're poisoning our blood. Sounding familiar? Yeah. And this is expressed in polemic and in what they say about people who claim to be, have sort of the high ground as Volk in a country. This poster is from Charlottesville, and the march there in 2017, the Nazi march, the fascist march, and their leader said they were fine people.
He did
Folk.
not say that.
His folk. Another part of that reinforces that is the ultranationalism. This is hyped. The nation is centered. And it's hyper. It's ultranationalism. It's over the top. You could argue maybe the nationalism in of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. But in fascist states, it's hyper-nationalism almost every time. And of course, they have their symbols. Those are rallying points. And their leader is usually a self-proclaimed nationalist, rallying that spirit, that ultra-nationalism. And that is a direct quote. And it has historical resonance. He didn't make that up. One last characteristic that fascist states tend to share almost universally is scapegoating, is finding an other to blame for the troubles of the time, be it economic, political, social, a war, whatever. We'll have some examples of that later, but these are kind of the general characteristics. Now I want to explain the word too for a second. Fasces. The word fascism comes from this symbol. This is a Roman symbol of unity and strength. It was actually carried by the bodyguards for the emperor, or the consul before Rome became an empire. And they were called lictors, and they carried this bundle of rods, usually with a long-handled axe in the middle and bound together. And that was to both represent a sort of unity of the Roman state, and also you could use those rods in defending the emperor or the consul if they're attacked. This in of itself is not a diabolical symbol. We have them in the halls of Congress, right at the dais in Congress, at each side. That is, those are fasces. Ironically, that's the German Chancellor Angela Merkel speaking in days past. You can go to the Lincoln Memorial, that solemn building in Washington, D.C., and you can see that good old Abe Lincoln is leaning his arms on fasces. So, in of themselves, it's not anything untoward or necessarily negative. It's a historic symbol. That's why it was chosen. And that's why the word fascism comes from it, because it started with Mussolini in Italy. And after World War I, Italy was in a terrible state. It had come into the war late on the side of the Allies, and it got nothing. Nothing at Versailles. And Italians felt like they had been betrayed. And so Mussolini found that political space to, he was a demagogue, to nurse that grudge. And he started this party, and he wondered what to call it. Now Mussolini, echoing an Italian political scientist by the name of Giovanni Gentili, had called fascism more appropriately, corporatism, because it was the merging of private interests of the business sector, of industry, with the state, with a sort of symbiotic relation between the two. And it was decided to use fascism because Mussolini wanted to harken back to ancient Rome, to that classical time that Romans hold dear. They remember their great, glorious days when the Italian peninsula was part of the Roman Empire. And so fascism was chosen because it attracted Italians to the fascist party in Italy. The first functional fascist government in the world was Mussolini in Italy, beginning in 1922. But there are other definitions. You can see a couple here. These are sort of Webster dictionary versions. A way of organizing society in which a government ruled by a dictator controls the lives of the people, and in which people are not allowed to disagree with the government. That's a very, very simple definition. And there are others. Here's what a communist thought of fascism. This is Georgy Dimitrov from Bulgaria. Fascism is the open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary, right-wing, most chauvinist, and most imperialist elements of finance capital. American had another definition. This is Henry Wallace, who was vice president under FDR in the 1930s until 1940, maybe 44. I think he actually served as vice president until 44. But this is what he says, an American. Fascism is one whose lust for money, is power, is combined with such an intensity of intolerance toward those of other races, parties, classes, religions, cultures, regions, or nations as to make him ruthless in his use of deceit or violence to attain his ends. He's talking about fascism in his own time in the 1930s in the United States. That's right. Fascism was extremely attractive. In the 1930s, many people openly praised Hitler, and carried the Nazi flag next to the American flag in parades. This is in the United States. This is not in Germany. And organizations like the American Bund and others increased in great numbers. And fascism was looking like a successful ideology in Germany. Hitler had pulled Germany out of the Depression fairly successfully, and German industry was beginning to increase production, and it was fairly successful for a while. And it was an alternative, as many Americans saw, to the New Deal, which really wasn't pulling the country out of the Depression. It was helping people, but it didn't really do much for the economy. So Hitler's success, many thought, could be cloned in the United States through an American fascist party. This is a huge gathering, not coincidentally, at Madison Square Garden, where thousands of fascists gathered. And here is a picture of George Washington with an American flag on each side and swastikas in between. There were summer camps, dozens of them throughout the country, where kids to go and be indoctrinated in fascist ideology and in fascist ideas. You can see the S there that will become a symbol within the Nazi hierarchy, the SS. It's actually a rune. But this was common. And there were some very notable fascist Americans of some celebrity, including Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford, both who were also raging anti-Semites. They were very, very prejudiced against Jews. You can see here, this is Charles Lindbergh accepting awards, the Iron Cross from Goering himself, the head of the Luftwaffe, and thanking Charles Lindbergh for helping them with their airplane production. So it's not new. It's not new on the scene at all, on the American scene and in American culture. But we see these guys, they're recognizable, it's kind of universally acknowledged that they were fascists. Hitler, Mussolini, Franco, Pinochet in Chile, Suharto in Indonesia. But what's happening now? You know, this is titled Here and Now. What is pulling together things societally that is seeing the growth of and the attraction of fascist ideology in the United States? How do you separate that out? Who's who? Scratch the surface, you pretty much have a fascist. It can happen here. So we're going to look here in more detail. Not so much, I've given you the kind of the basic characteristics, the historical background, but we're going to look at Jason Stanley's recent book. It came out in 2018, called How Fascism Works. He's from Cornell, and he wrote kind of an update of what's happening with this ideology in the United States in particular. And he's got 10 points here. We're going to kind of look at each one of them, what they mean. And they're a little different than former definitions that you saw, the leader, the country, the party, the scapegoat. Those remain. But there are other things going on that are unique to American society that is seeing an increasing attraction to fascism. And one is, this first one I have highlighted, the notion of a grand mythic national past being denigrated or destroyed at the hands of treasonous liberal and left elites and racial, ethnic, or cultural minorities that must be redeemed from humiliation. It has its antecedents. The Germans, the Nazis in particular, were good at imagery, iconography, anything that sort of harkened back to a golden age of German power and pride. They go to the Teutonic Knights, they go back 1,000 years to the First Reich, which was under Otto, centuries ago. But the sort of, you can see the Teutonic Knight is cast, along with the German soldier, and this pride in a golden past, a myth. And again, it's got a commonality. Part of the whole MAGA movement is the hearkening back to some golden age, some romantic constitutional utopia that many people want to embrace. They want that. It's understandable. The Tea Party movement in the early 2000 teens was a hearkening back to what was seen as a romantic golden age of American freedom. And the Minuteman and all the other symbols that we like to look at, that we get out of history books, a pride in our past, the victory in wars and keeping the country together in a terrible struggle, the Civil War, coming to rescue Germany in World War I, and again, fighting fascism in World War II on two fronts, Japan and Germany. But it's more than that. It's deeply cultural. The Nazis, fascists in Germany, did the same thing. So did Mussolini in Italy. And it's done in fascist states all over. It's being done in India now with Modi, with Orban in Hungary, Meloni in Italy. They're all following a pattern. And that is somehow rescuing their countries from the rot of leftist ideology who are trying to ruin their golden past and rob them of this utopia in the past. Hitler did it through family and family values. He thought that German women needed to be good mothers to create soldiers, that their place was at home, strictly, and to have children and to increase the population. And, family values. It was a party that seems to pride itself on being the party of family values. Worse than that, though, is not only the emphasis on that, but the fact that all of those things are being attacked by this enemy, this left-wing conspiracy, the communists out there trying to destroy the structure of the family. whether it's trans or gays or females, whatever. And that message is repeated. You know, the war on Christianity, the war against the nuclear family, the war against the family, Hollywood's war against family values, that enemy out there. That's a part of identifying this enemy, this scapegoat, in order to unify people around a common cause. And it's based on division, and it's based on grievance. And it goes further yet. The assault on American values includes religion. And a good demagogue latches right onto that. As you can see, but he's not the only one. Hitler claimed to be defending Christianity. He's seen here, he used photo opportunities with cathedrals in the background and with church officials, and to try and make sure that he was aligned with being the protector of Christianity. But it's not just photo ops, there is his own words from Mein Kampf. Today I believe I am acting in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator. Quote, unquote. You can find it in Mein Kampf. It's got chapter and verse there. Look it up. And when Hitler was defeated and in ashes, a contemporary fascist, a bro, you might say, in the modern parlance, said this of Hitler. Adolf Hitler, the son of the Catholic Church, died while defending Christianity. This is Franco saying this. I'm just giving you the quote. It is therefore understandable that words cannot be found to lament over his death, when so many were found to exalt his life. Over his mortal remains stands his glorious, victorious figure. With the palm of the martyr, God gives Hitler the laurels of victory. This is documented. You can find these ties between religion and fascism in this book, God and the Fascists, where it looks at all of these different fascist figures and how they attach to themselves sort of protectors of Christianity. There's a more contemporary version. Chris Hedges, a really great author, wrote about the Christian right and the war on America, and that connection, that fascist connection that we see between this ideology and today's Christians, at least some of them. This is a fact. This is a fact. It was a factor in the election last week. It's been a factor in elections now for a dozen or so years, notably. Actually, probably going back to Reagan, when you saw the rise of the religious right and the moral minority, or moral majority. But just a reminder, there are other voices on this. God is mentioned how many times in the Constitution? None. Oh, but it was an oversight, right? They forgot. They just forgot. Right. It was deliberate. Those were often church-going, pious men, self-avowed Christians. But they recognized at the time the danger of mixing religion and politics. And that has made it into our Constitution. Article 6.3. Look it up. Who's got the Constitution with them? No religious test. First Amendment, freedom to worship, the free exercise clause. There's no religion can be established, the establishment clause, the freedom from religion. That's in the Bill of Rights. And we have their words, erecting a wall of separation, which isn't in the Constitution. Jefferson said it many years later, but he said there should be a wall. It's absolutely essential in a free society between religion and state. The purpose of separation of church and state is to keep from forever these shores the ceaseless strife that soaked the blood of Europe for centuries, meaning religious strife, religious wars. The 30 Years' War, the wars of religion on the continent. This is James Madison, who wrote the Constitution, wrote the Bill of Rights, so helped a lot with the Constitution, did write most of the Bill of Rights. Washington himself, John Adams, It's kind of a reminder. The second characteristic that Jason Stanley talks about is the use of information, or really misinformation. The propaganda of projection, wherein rulers call their enemies what they themselves are. The best example is you're a fascist. When a fascist calls you a fascist, you kind of have to have a response to that. Well, it just so happens that I do. There's the political spectrum. And this is a variation. You see different political spectrums figured a little differently. I've seen spirals and graphs, bar graphs, pie graphs, this linear scale, but not once ever in a textbook on political science is fascism ever considered anything but a right-wing ideology, period. Now, what's left and right? Do you know where we get those terms even? France. We get it from the French Assembly during the French Revolution when they first got together. All the radicals and the revolutionaries sat on the left. The conservatives, the pro-monarchists and others sat on the right. Right wing, left wing, that's where we get it. So it's imperfect and it's hard to pigeonhole a thing exactly, but it's helpful in trying to determine sort of where a political point of view lies. Let's take the Germans. They, where we get the word Nazi, called themselves the National Socialist German Workers' Party. That is where we, the acronym for that, we get the word Nazi. Socialist, there it is. I guess that says it. If it says socialist, then I guess Nazis are socialists, which would make them leftists, right? Right? People who assume Nazis were socialists because socialist is in their name must be terribly confused by the humble titmouse. Neither a tit nor a mouse. I could be jocular about it, but let's give you some facts. And I want to put this one to bed for good because I'm tired of hearing it. It's just not true. It's a specious argument that fascism is a left-wing ideology. It's not. And I don't know any political scientist or historian of any repute that would claim that. If the Nazis were socialists, why did German industrialists side with and fund Hitler? Why did companies like Krupp hand out copies of Mein Kampf to their workers? Left-winger wouldn't do that. Why would Hitler award a capitalist such as Henry Ford? How come the idea of privatization was coined for what the Nazis were doing? They were privatizing industry. They were letting it go on its own. They weren't trying to control it like social governments or communist governments would do. They had complete freedom. Why did Hitler expel every bit of left-wing opposition? If he's a leftist ideology, you'd think he'd welcome leftist ideology. He didn't. Either killed them or ran them out of the country or put them in a death camp, which was the same thing. Why did they ban all unions, besides that of the one that they created to control labor? They banned. One of the first things the Nazis did when Hitler came to power was ban unions. Completely. Why was collective bargaining banned? Why did they place price controls? Why were women discouraged from working instead being pushed to be mothers? Why were conservatives in Hitler's cabinet? Why did they ally with the conservatives and not parties like the Socialist Democratic Party or the Communist Party? They didn't. They allied with industrialists, with the rich, with those who could, in every way, were conservative, not liberal and not radical. So, the Nazis weren't socialists. By all means, they were economic capitalists and social conservatives. And you can deny history, but you can't change those facts. So hopefully it puts that one to bed. And as Hitler said, make the big lie, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually people will believe it. Well, saying it don't make it true. An assault on intellectuals and free thought is what Jason Stanley says is another characteristic. And attack on independent media. Where have we heard that? Control of information is essential. And controlling the message is even more essential. And if you don't believe me, by skillful and sustained use of propaganda, one can make people see even heaven as hell or an extremely wretched life as paradise. And Goering, the propaganda minister, said, "Let me control the media and I will turn any nation into a herd of pigs." Yeah. And when free information is really not out there, when media is controlled by the corporatocracy, which is really a lapdog for, the media's lapdog for both parties. I don't think either party has an edge on that, to tell you the truth. Our sources of information are all corporate. I tell my students, these are everything, almost every bit of news that you can get broadcast-wise, unless you're searching for alternative sources. Most mainstream media, as they call it mainstream, is controlled by corporations. You can see the logos there. Why in the hell would they ever let any news get out that would hurt their bottom line? They're about business. And I tell my students, keep in mind that news, as it comes from all of these outlets, is not news. Unless, of course, you're interested in fire, flood, rape, and murder. There's no real news there. Nothing that can help you as an informed citizen, say, to vote. It is filler. News is filler between commercials. That's where the money is. That's what corporations do. They make money. That's their job. That is, in fact, their only job. They don't make money from news. They make money from the commercials. And they have to make it titillating, controversial, scandalous enough, lurid enough, frightening enough to keep your attention between the commercials. And they do a damn good job of it. And in the meantime, you get nothing in the form of real information. Something irrelevant happened in your life just happened now, and I'm going to blow it out of proportion for days to keep you distracted from what's really going on. That's pretty much it. It can be more pernicious than that. Hitler again. All propaganda has to be popular. It has to accommodate itself to the comprehension of the least intelligent of those it seeks to reach. Adolf. Again, a direct quote. You can find it in Mein Kampf. I don't have the citation there. Keep them looking, and the beat goes on. But again, it gets worse than that. It's not just news, it's information. The Nazis were famous for burning books. And I think it was Elie Wiesel, I can't recall exactly, who said to him, "They start burning books, it's not long before they start burning people." This was a candidate running for office, and she prided herself with her video burning books. And this is a pastor in Tennessee having a big old book burning bonfire. Mostly Harry Potter books, those seditious, revolutionary, decadent books. The next one is actually my favorite to put together. And it's unreal conspiracy theories and other attacks on the truth and coherent thinking. Reason, proof, things like that you used to even get from the news. And sometimes you do. But it's out there. people accepting ideas without any sort of substantiation, the most crazy ideas, such as the Jews have put a laser beam on a satellite in space and were causing forest fires in California. I'm not making this up. This is real. I mean, it's moon bat stuff coming from moon bat people. And the worst is when they have an outlet to be able to give you that moon bat stuff. It didn't take much of a search at all to find this stuff from Musk. This is just the tip of the iceberg from the kind of stuff that he has espoused. And he can espouse it all he wants. He owns a huge media outlet with Twitter, X. And like I say, then there are others that can do great harm with their lives in attacking families of children who were killed in a mass killing and claiming that never happened, that they were actors, and that the whole thing was a setup for some reason to take away his guns, whatever. He will never be able to pay off the fine that he got in court, which proved that he was lying, of course, and lying for profit, which is the worst possible thing. And the damage that he did is incalculable to those people who lost their children. So this can be pernicious too, harmful. And then there is the strong attachment to social hierarchy and inequality, an attachment to inequality, with the superior us over the inferior them. The scapegoating, it's been done, we know. Hitler was pretty thorough about this. He went after Jews. The symbols there are the purple triangle. Anybody know what that represents? Jehovah's Witnesses had to wear a purple triangle. Yeah, they were rounded up in great numbers and killed in the death camps. Of course, the cross, many Christians of conscience, Catholics as well, were rounded up. If they didn't agree with Hitler, with the Nazi regime, they were targets, despite him being the protector of Christianity, as he claimed. Communists, of course, you can see from the symbol, were rounded up. Gypsies, almost wiped out in Western Europe. The Untermensch, anybody know what that is? The lower human beings. It literally means, in German, Underman. It means a low person. And this can refer to the mentally retarded, the mentally ill, people who are affected, say, by birth defects or brain aneurysms, any number of things. Actually, I could have been dragged off as one. I have a back deformity, congenital back deformity. I don't have good genes. I could have ended up in one of the trucks that they used. That's who they experimented on first, was the absolutely most weak and helpless. These poor people were rounded up in great numbers, put in trucks in which the exhaust was hooked to a large van, and they were carbon monoxide poisoned. Yeah, it was actually an experiment to see if it could work, mass gassing. It did, and they kept doing it. They got more refined. It turned industrial to where they were killing millions. And then the purple triangle, or the pink triangle. Anybody know what that is? Yep. The homosexuals were given a pink triangle, and they were rounded up too in large numbers, and either worked to death or executed. So there's enough. Hitler had a lot of others he went after, and this points that out. There's a few there that I didn't mention. Chinese, Africans, Slavs in particular. Hundreds of thousands of Slavs, Germans and Poles were executed. And not just in the camps, but in the field. There was a huge massacre of Polish soldiers, mostly officers. But that was by the Russians. But the Germans were doing it too. They were actually cooperating in Poland at first. The other, you got to have a target out there. We all know who are the targets now. I don't have to tell you. And get ready for a lot more of it. and maybe even scenes like this. I don't think this is hyperbole or tapping into this happened. Another characteristic is the bitter and angry claims that one's favored and superior group is being unjustly victimized. Jeez, the victim. Hitler, the victim. Hitler thought he was a victim of the Jews and some conspiracy to control the economy. Also a victim of betrayal, of losing World War I, and the stab in the back that you hear a lot. That he used this a lot to garner support from Germans, many Germans who were looking for an answer to the defeat in World War I, and he served it on a plate. We were victimized unjustly. We were betrayed by people within, Jews, and by people from without, communists. You know, picking it, you gotta have somebody to pick on. And you see this too. This march back in 2017, I believe, the march in Charlottesville, and I choose this one because it was the most glaring and it was the most covered. There's pretty good pictures from it. Was you can see it in red there. They will not replace us. There's this replacement theory that somehow the favored group is being displaced and taken over and edged out and is in danger and threatened. And of course, the rallying point from the poster is they will not replace us. They actually chanted this as they marched along in a fireside march with torches, just like some Nuremberg spectacle. And that changed after a while from "you will not replace us" to "Jews will not replace us." It's been recorded. And that somehow whites are being picked on, bullied, white racism. This author has written a couple of books about it. He's made the talk show circuit, talking about the persecution of white America. Again, this favored group, highest in number and populace, and also most control of wealth in the society, it is somehow being persecuted. It's a ploy, and we sometimes hear the truth. That's a direct quote. Again, it's a cynical use, a manipulation of people's emotions and passions for political gain, for power, is what it boils down to. I like the way Stanley puts this. He said, "There is a fierce, lawless commitment to law and order." What is that? I know what he means there. Aimed at crushing corruption and anarchy of the evil others. Again, we're getting the others. And they are elite, liberal, and leftist allies. It has its antecedents. The fixation of law and order was a hallmark of the Nazis, and that's why the Gestapo was created. And they were effective, and they were the tip of the spear. They were the ones who went out and rounded up all those different peoples, all those different others. And in the name of bringing order to German society again. And the militarization of police is a step in the direction of fascism. It's really a good thing that it hasn't happened here. And of course, the figures, the statistics reveal themselves in this. They're not making this up. Again, this is not hyperbole. Look at the numbers. The United States has far more incarcerated people than anywhere else in the world, including the Chinese, who have a lot more people than us. This obsession with crime and punishment and order, it serves a authoritarian state, a fascist state. Hyper-masculinism and fear and hostility to feminism, gays, and transgender rights. Again, picking on a tiny minority, at least the last two, because it's easy, and manifesting itself in this toxic masculinity that has attached itself to a certain party and a certain individual, has organized into guy clubs, say a drinking club, right? That's what Gavin McInnes said it was. It wasn't. We know from all the Proud Boys that went to prison that are going to be pardoned here soon. And this made up, again, this persecution, this war on men, which manifests itself in a counter striking out to be a real war on women. And this patriarchy taken to levels that we haven't seen in a really, really long time. And if you don't believe me, there's been a 4,000% rise in specific phrases online that are misogynistic and violent posts against women just in the last week, including this really dandy quote. Again, I'm not making this up. This is from Nick Wintus. And of course, it's not just women. Easy target is the trans community, gays, lesbians, bisexuals, all of the different acronyms for all the different gender identities. And it's an easy talking point because people are fearful. You strike out at fear, and demagogues are really, really good at manipulating fear, especially xenophobia, fear of a stranger. And again, these expressions, these guys out there, these marches are almost all white guys. They've got this grievance that somehow their life has been ruined by liberal elites, by an America that doesn't remember its patriarchal past. I don't know what the beef is, but it's got resonance. This is a torch fire march that was so common in Nazi Germany. You would see these marches frequently, and then the big Nuremberg spectacles. Another one that you hear a lot about, and I think is a factor, and it's this growing divide between rural and urban. This sort of idea that the true identity of the country comes from the country, from rural life and rural culture. This goes back as far as Jefferson, who believed that the ideal American society were yeoman farmers with a little patch of land, growing stuff, independent from the dependence on a job or an employer. And that was never true. It's never been true, but it's one that is clung to, and it is a good point for division. It's a good way to weasel that wedge in there, city against rural. And urban has a double meaning, and you all know what it is. It's a dog whistle, it's code for blacks, always. Almost every time you hear urban culture, it's not talking about cities. So again, these use of words to manipulate people's feelings and passions. And there was a day or a romantic past, things that occurred in American history that did spring from the country, with the farmer, the cowboy, the pioneers, the mountain man, but they weren't formative, and they no longer exist. And to hearken back to this past that doesn't exist is, I'll put it in the words of Jill Lepore from Harvard. She wrote a book when she went and hung out with a whole bunch of Tea Party patriots in 2010, 2011, when they were sort of oncoming and reaching their peak. And after talking to them, she wrote this interesting book called By the Whites of Their Eyes. And she uses one word repeatedly in talking about these people who are hearkening back to this utopia, this golden age. Tragic, because in most cases, the thing they're hearkening back to is mythic. It doesn't exist. It never existed. And it won't exist. We live in different times. And the Minutemen and the Continental Soldiers and the intrepid pioneers and the cowboy and the farmers out on the plains were a real thing. But it wasn't what we get in the movies. And it's certainly not what has been blown out of proportion by those who hearken back to such things. Exploitation of the populist notion that hard-working people, producers, are being shafted by a global parasitic financial beast, often Jews, but not exclusively. Jason Stanley is Jewish, by the way. But often Jews are cast in that role. You hear it a lot. There's a lot. We know anti-Semitism is growing, and attacks on Jews have increased. And it's sort of, again, this us against them. It's nationalism, countries, and independence of countries against globalists who are trying to unite the world into some sort of diabolical combine to where they can control everything, wages, production, wealth, and keep it for themselves. And they're the enemy. And of course, a good, strong national core will keep those things at bay. It's an appeal, again, to ultranationalism. And I found this on the net, and it's interesting. Even Trump is on the side there of nationalism and representing all of these negative things. And then on the lighter side, actually lighter in color, are two Jews in which all the wonders of globalism are offered. Yeah, come on. This is ridiculous. This is, again, this delusional moonbat thinking that you see with guys like Alec Jones and others, blogists. It's a confusing time. There are lots of images out there. There are lots of confusing issues. But I think if you stick to it, and I plan to do that, I did not want to detour from what I'm trying to say here is that there is a deep, deep fascism in this country. It's been here for a while. It has historic roots, and it's only growing. And if you don't believe me, well, look, just look. Does it walk like a duck? Does it swim like a duck? Does it quack like a duck? And you can check those boxes for yourself. But all I have to say is that, in the words of Voltaire, those who can make you believe absurdities, space lasers, can make you commit atrocities. And I think it is the obligation of us who keep our heads on straight, who do our research, who look at things dispassionately and aren't swayed by demagogues or a demagogic party for their own interests, to do one thing right now. We can't give in to cynicism, we can't. I am so tempted. My wife voted for Trump, for crying out loud. You think I'm not thinking about divorce? I've been married 52 years. This hits home. I think it's hit all of us in one fashion or another. I said I wasn't going to say that. It's hard, and it's been a hard week, but I remember how I felt when that warmonger, that war criminal, Trump took us into Iraq, when a country that did absolutely nothing to us, we know was a lie, and it was a war crime. Bush. What did I say? I will say one thing for Trump. He didn't take us to war in the 4 years he was in power. I can say that. So it is the truth. I won't shrink from that. I'll give credit where credit's due. I hope he stays that way. But Bush took us to war, and I was crushed. something in me broke and hasn't healed. I was heartened with Obama, though I didn't vote for him the second time because of his drone policy of killing innocents. I couldn't bring myself to do it. No more than I could vote for Kamala because of her support for Israel. I'm trying to stay consistent with my moral stances. And again, it was redoubled. Actually, a lot of people, I came into work in 2016 after Trump was elected the first time. I could hear people in their offices crying. And I just tapped lightly, and you okay? You know, and they get a Kleenex and clean themselves up, and I just listened. I was doing triage. I was doing political and emotional triage for hours. I missed my first class that day. And a couple of people said to me, I know how you think. I thought we'd be worried about you. And I said, I hit bottom in 2004. I'm still on the bottom. I was on the bottom in 2016. I had nowhere to go. So I wasn't that emotional about it. And then guess what I found out last week? There's a bottom below the bottom. That's just me. And this is a meeting of Democrats, and I'm actually not a Democrat. I voted for Jill Stein 3 times. I voted for Ralph Nader twice. I voted for Ross Perot. Yeah, you know. Yeah, I voted for Kerry in 2004. I voted for Biden in 2020. I voted for Reagan in 1984. I was living in Alaska and I was out of my mind. My inner redneck had taken over and I couldn't control it. That was Alaska for you. So I'm all over the place on the political spectrum. And I usually vote for the person, for morality, for ethics. And I want to close here with what really counts here. Is anybody familiar with Sophie Scholl and the White Rose? She started a group with her fellows and one instructor called the White Rose in the midst of World War II. It was 43, probably the most intense year of the war. And she started a little group. They ran off mimeograph copies of protests against the Nazi government and against the war. She was 20, maybe you could attribute her foolishness to age, but nevertheless, she took a stand. She took a moral stand, and her words resonate to this day. We have her words. By the way, all of the White Rose were guillotined. They were executed. And they said, their statement was, nothing is so unworthy of a civilized nation as allowing itself to be governed without opposition by an irresponsible clique that has yielded to base instinct. And this is my life. Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. And those who do study history are doomed to stand by helplessly while everybody else repeats it. Welcome to my life. All I can say is resist, fight. This is the group that stood up against the bullies, those Nazis and white supremacists in Charlotte many years ago, and got in their face and stopped them cold. Inform yourself, educate yourself. There's some great books out there. Bertram Gross's book, Friendly Fascism, came out 20 years ago, but it's still pretty good. Jason Stanley's first book on fascism came out, I think, in 2018. Very good, and his most recent book, which I just finished last week, Erasing History, which comes home to me as to how fascists try to rewrite history, which Orwell talked about. Controlling information controls both the past, present, and the future, and how that's being done. I'm telling you right now, I'm predicting you're going to go after education. You're going to come after me. And I say bring it on, but I'm going to retire in 2 years anyway, so I'm going down fighting. And I think that will be the primary cause that vice presidents tend to take of events. He stated as much. In fact, he was pointing right at me when he said it. He might as well have been when he said, the professors are the enemy. I welcome his hatred. Come get me. There are two other books that I think really are worth reading, and it goes beyond the polemic, the political, to the very, very personal. And this is a biography, but he's written an autobiography too that just came out called The Klansman's Son. And Derek Black's story is told by Eli Saslow here, how he used to be the leader of the white supremacy movement. He was a young kid, and he was being groomed to take over for his father. His godfather is David Duke. And he pulled himself out of it. Guess how? He went to a liberal arts college. It's like my brother said a few years ago. He said, "What the fuck happened to you?" Because my whole family are rednecks and Trumpsters. And I said, education. I got an education at Western, at a liberal college. Yeah. That's what did it, is seeing outside my little box that I've been raised with. And those mores and those attitudes and those norms were challenged by my professors, by the things that I read. And now, I'm one of them. And it's been quite a journey, I have to say. I always throw in personal anecdotes like this, I think, because it's important to know what all of our journeys are. I like to hear these from students. They won't say in class, I make them write little biographies, but we're all on that journey, and I think just keeping ourselves informed, girded, and most of all, I think the thing I forgot that is probably the most important of all of this is that the fact that probably the single most consistent characteristic of fascism, no matter what time and space, what country or leader, is a serious animosity and hostility towards democracy. And I never thought I'd live to see the day where Americans would have the attitude towards democracy, the things that I've heard, like it's a dirty word. And that's another thing we have to hold dear, is our constitutional precepts, our ideals, our and everything embodied in that. The rule of law. We're nothing. Again, I tell my students this, are very, very diverse, mostly Hispanics these days. 50% of Mount Vernon High, 50% of Burlington High are Latinos and Hispanics. These are going to be our future citizens. And I just tell them, you know, we don't have a lot of commonality. We're an extremely diverse society, and that's a good thing, I think. The different languages, different religions, different political points of views, ethnicities. The only thing we have in common is the Constitution. The rule of law. That belongs to all of us. It's a birthright. And if you stick with that, I think all things will be good. We'll just see if we can. Okay. Any questions at all? Yeah.
Susan Red, who was the vice president that said that the professor is the enemy?
The what?
The professor.
J.D. Vance said that.
J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance, actually, he was quoting somebody.
Repeat the question.
Oh, yeah, she asked, thanks. You told me you'd tell me to do that, and I usually do. Who said that the professors were the enemy? And it was J.D. Vance, and he was paraphrasing or quoting somebody else. But he said it. And I realized at that moment what he was going to be doing in his vice presidency. I may be wrong, I hope I'm wrong. But I've got a target on my back. Yeah.
So, as fascism rose in Europe, do you see an equivalent of what social media has done? I mean, Trump targeted uneducated, not working, white males who live on social media world. And so do you see an equivalent in Germany? Nazi Germany?
The question was there equivalent in Nazi Germany to manipulation of information that you see with social media. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. Look at the brilliance of what Goebbels did with the Ministry of Propaganda. No country had ever had a Ministry of Propaganda before. The United States created one for a short time called the Committee for Public Information, which was meant to garner support for World War I, which most Americans did not support. But that was done away with after the war. But one of the first things that, well, they actually had a propaganda minister, an official, before they even took power, Goebbels. And he was brilliant at using information like that to disseminate in the way that he could. He didn't have social media, but they would hand out flyers, put up posters. Mostly it was the big rallies that they had, where the working poor would show up and get bratwurst beer and propaganda in the beer halls, or maybe at the torchlight parade afterwards. So the Nazis were extremely adept at getting their message out with the means that they had at the time. Control of information and manipulating that information to your cause is a huge part of an effective, a successful fascist government.
Don't forget Leni Riefenstahl.
Well, and that was so brilliant. The Spirit of the Will, her movie. You don't have to be a Nazi to enjoy it. And I love the battleship Potemkin about a revolution in 1905 in Russia by Eisenstein, and it's just so brilliant. It's pro-communist propaganda, but I found myself standing up and screaming, you know, when the Tsar's soldiers bayonet the baby in the carriage. That's effective propaganda, and Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will was this wonderful, beautifully crafted movie which touted the virtues of Nazism and Nazi ideology. You gotta see propaganda for what it is. It can be artful, and when they're artful, they can even be more effective. Another one was the one done about the Jews. I forget the name of it. Vermin or Time or something horrible like that. It was a horrible depiction of Jews. It was completely anti-Semitic and effective in that it painted the Jews as horrible, exactly how the Nazis wanted them to be perceived. Yeah, but be careful, information. Guard yourself. There are all sorts of fact-checking websites that you can go to. One is Ground News, if you're familiar with it, and where you can check the facts. You can also, it tells you the source of information and the bias, which publication did it and which author. And I tell my students about this. In fact, I give them a primer the first week on media literacy. You've got to stay ahead of the propaganda. It's so easy to be fooled by the lurid, the sensational, the emotional.
Sir, did you call that ground? What was it?
Ground News is the name of the website, and it's really good, and it's fair. It lays it out. It tells you the bias, right or left, of any given article, and the publication is that it's in. It gives you background on who publishes it, who funds that publishing house, or that author that, say, may come from a think tank, maybe a liberal think tank or maybe a conservative think tank, but it tells you who's writing it, and you can begin to gauge the information in it from its bias, from where it comes from. There are several like that. Yeah.
There are at least 75 million people in the country who think this fascism thing is bunk, including several guests here tonight that are kind of taking notes and whatnot to report back. But how do you get to
Your question?
How do you get to the 75 million people to have an understanding of what's actually going on?
Well, I can only use my family as an example. I'm the only person left of center. My entire family, they're way out over in the right area. QAnon nutbags. And none of them got vaccinated. I work on ships in the summer. And I can have guests on the ship. And a year after COVID, they still were requiring anybody that comes on the ship, passengers or crew, myself included, to get vaccinated. So I contacted all my brothers and sisters and I offered them a free cruise. I said, great, I'll go. I said, oh, but you gotta get vaccinated. And they all turned me down. They turned down a free cruise. Even when it's in their interests.
I think it's kind of a self-licking ice cream cone. It's an echo chamber in which clouds any sort of outside challenge to fixed ideas and accepted ideas. It becomes identity, that to challenge those ideas is a sort of challenge who you are. We all know how cult-like the worship of Trump is. It is. And that goes beyond reason. And so I'm an academic. I use reason and rhetoric and sources and proofs and things like that. They're bulletproof. So it doesn't work on my family. It won't work on your friends and family who are in that echo chamber, in that insular bubble. Patience. Patience. My mantra has been be kind. These are your loved ones, and
Oh, I think I am.
the truth is the truth.
Lecture us nonstop for an hour every Sunday.
And I don't want to pass this through.
Every Sunday, 1 hour.
Another question? Yeah,
I have some, I take exception to some of the things you said.
I'm sure you do.
I'm not, I have a question. When you presented the political spectrum, left to right, I take exception to that. It shouldn't be an ideology, it should be the type of government. On one side should be 100% total government, the other side 0% government. 100% you have totalitarian, authoritarian, communism, socialism, fascism, no matter what ism you get it, it's authoritarian. No government, anarchy. And then you have democracy. And then you have the republic. I noticed on your spectrum you didn't have republic, which is what we are.
Yeah, we are.
Which is the rule of law.
And what do we do this week for our republic?
We elected a leader. Our
Democracy.
beliefs in rule.
We use democratic mechanisms to elect our leader.
Constitutional representative.
Do you have a question?
government. Why is that projection? Oh, is that right? You accuse your enemy of doing what you're actually doing.
Right.
So why is it that Trump isn't calling anybody a Nazi, but everybody on the left is calling Trump a Nazi?
Well, did everybody hear the question?
No.
Why is it that Trump isn't calling anybody a Nazi, but everybody on the left is calling him a
So the
Nazi?
projection then is from the left is calling Trump what they are, according to what you said.
Precisely.
According to what you said. You call your
Yeah, that's
enemy
what the
you are.
that's what projection is.
And so you're calling your enemy a Nazi, and so that makes you the Nazi.
Not my enemy. I'm just
Well,
calling
you're
Nazi a Nazi.
projecting.
No,
Yeah.
So you ended your presentation with that resist button. And historically, what's the best way to resist a fascist regime? Assuming the ballot isn't going to be.
I think to the great failing of the German people was good Nazis let it happen. There were good Nazis. Most were not Nazis. Hitler was never elected by a majority, and the Nazi Party, until he came to power, was never a majority. He formed a coalition government. He came to power because Hindenburg saw him as maybe a good alternative, but not knowing, really. He was an old man who died shortly thereafter. And I think if you, whatever your internal guide, your internal compass is, whether it's Buddhist or Christian or Jewish or atheist or whatever, cleave to the morality. What is right and wrong? This is the reason I couldn't vote for Harris, was because of the support for Israel and the genocide in Palestine. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I could not cross that line. I consider myself a moral person. I could not do anything otherwise. I think we need to keep the compass true. I think we need to, what are those moral precepts? Love your brother, be kind, you know, it's as simple as that.
How do we organize, though, to resist?
Well,
You know,
people
Poland kind of pulled
people
itself
tend to
back.
organize around political parties or social groups, talking to each other. But I think you need to keep the issues up front. You need to be aware. You can't hide your head in the sand about this. And I think just follow your heart. I mean, we don't always right and wrong here. And this is what's, my wife's a better person than I am, and we've got some talking to do. And how she could vote for a rapist, a misogynist, a liar.
How about the end of fascism? All right, like Spain, I lived in Spain under Franco. I saw Franco that far away from
Yeah.
France, right? And I went to University of Madrid for a summer.
And he died in bed.
Yeah, I know, but the thing is, his situation was that, you know, they became a democracy after that. Same thing in Portugal, all right, which ended with this revolution of the young guys. Well, Mussolini, they dragged him out. Hitler lost the war. All right, so there's 4 examples of change from fascism to something better.
I think,
What? I don't have any answer. I'm just saying that.
I don't either. All I can
France
do is look at, as a
situation.
historian, is look at the history. His question was, how does fascism end? And I think, like Nazism, I think like Mussolini's fascism in Italy, most fascist governments seem to burn out of their own excesses. But getting there, look what happened, look what Hitler was able to do before it burned out. The thing is to stop it before it reaches a point to where it can control the state so totally, which is what fascists do. And it's a matter, I think, of just being on guard and not giving into it, not getting apathetic and giving up like I think many of us probably are at this point. I was for a while. I didn't know how I was going to go into a classroom and teach American history. I would have felt like a fraud. But slowly, you know, they say time wounds all heals. Did I say that right? I think I actually said it right. So take heart, you know, and have a heart. I think I'm going to the llama here. Be kind. Be kind. You know, and in fact, with relatives who are so intransigent and locked in their echo chamber, just be kind. I was going through the airport one time in Seattle, and everybody's in a frenzy, and this guy was talking too loud on the type, you know. So I heard, as I walked by, I heard him say a thing that just struck me. And he said, he's arguing with somebody pretty heatedly, and he said, you know what? I'd rather be kind than right. And I knew the saying, that's the Lama. That's the Dalai Lama. And there's a lot to be said for that. You can try and win every argument, but if it has no traction, what's the point? Kindness has traction. Compassion. We've got to come from that, and we've got to protect the weak and the innocent and the other who's going to be attacked now and here. I'm not a Christian, but you got to love your brother as yourself, you know, and we've got to safeguard those people because they're not going to be able to do it. We can. We are all pretty much here in a privileged position that we can stand up for the weak and help us and those who are going to be attacked here. And that's where our work is right now, I think, in just weathering this storm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A lot of this was therapeutic for me. I appreciate you allowing me to save us.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome.